You want a home, and I need a child as heir. These words, cold, transactional, brutally honest, would change everything. When a dying widow collapses at the edge of a stranger's ranch with her feverish son in her arms, she has nothing left to lose. The silent rancher who saves them has buried his own grief so deep he's forgotten how to live. But when a powerful enemy comes to tear them apart, they'll forge the most unexpected alliance, a marriage built not on love, but survival. What begins as desperation will become something neither of them saw coming. If you want to see how this impossible arrangement transforms into something real, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The sun had no mercy. Clara Holloway had learned this truth over the past 6 days as it beat down on her shoulders like a hammer on an anvil, relentless and cruel. The Texas plains stretched endlessly in every direction, a sea of brown grass and cracked earth that seemed to mock her with its vastness. Somewhere behind her lay the town that had turned her away. Somewhere ahead, she told herself, there had to be something, someone, anywhere that wasn't here. But Noah was burning up. She felt it through the thin fabric of his shirt pressed against her chest as she stumbled forward. His small body radiated heat like a coal stove, and his breathing had grown shallow and rapid. At 4 years old, he was too big to carry for miles, but too sick to walk. So Clara carried him anyway, because that's what mothers did. That's what she had left. Mama. His voice was barely a whisper, dry as the land around them. Shh, baby, we're almost there. The lie tasted like dust on her tongue. Almost where? She didn't know. The farmhouse she'd spotted from the ridge an hour ago had turned out to be abandoned, its windows dark and broken. The creek bed she'd hoped might have water was nothing but stones and memory. Her canteen had run dry yesterday. The last of their bread was gone this morning. Clara's vision swam. The horizon tilted, and she stumbled, barely catching herself before they both went down. Noah whimpered against her neck. I know, sweetheart. I know it hurts. She forced her legs to keep moving, one foot in front of the other, though every muscle screamed for her to stop. Just a little further. The afternoon sun was lowering when she saw it, a fence line, dark against the golden grass. Real. Maintained. Which meant people. Which meant hope. Clara's heart lurched with desperate relief. She adjusted Noah in her arms, ignoring the way her back protested, and pushed toward that fence with everything she had left. As she got closer, she could make out buildings in the distance, a barn, a windmill, a house with smoke rising from its chimney. Someone was home. The fence seemed to take forever to reach, and when she finally got there, Clara had to lean against it, gasping. Noah's fever-hot cheek pressed against hers. His breathing was wrong, too fast, too shallow. How long had it been like that? An hour? 2? Hello? Her voice came out as a croak. She tried again, louder. Hello, please! I need help! Nothing, just the whisper of wind through dry grass and the distant creak of the windmill. Clara gripped the fence rail, trying to stay upright. She could see the house clearly now, maybe 300 yards away. So close. But Noah was so heavy, and her legs were shaking, and the world kept tilting in ways it shouldn't. Please, she whispered to no one. Please. She climbed through the fence, a clumsy, desperate scramble that nearly sent them both sprawling. On the other side, she started toward the house. But her body had different plans. Her knees buckled. The ground rushed up. The last thing Clara saw before darkness took her was the vast blue sky, empty except for a single hawk circling overhead. Then even that faded. Caleb Mercer was fixing a section of tack in the barn when Rufus started barking. The old cattle dog rarely made noise without reason, which meant something was wrong. Caleb set down the leather strap he'd been mending and stepped out into the late afternoon light, squinting toward where Rufus stood at the edge of the yard, hackles raised. At first, Caleb thought it might be a coyote. They'd been bold lately, coming closer to the buildings. But as he walked nearer, following Rufus's insistent barking, he saw something that made him stop dead. 2 people. One large, one small, collapsed in his north pasture about 50 yards from the fence line. For a moment, just a heartbeat, Caleb considered walking back to the barn, pretending he hadn't seen. People meant complications, and he'd had enough of those to last a lifetime. His ranch was his refuge, his isolation earned through years of grief. He didn't want the world intruding here. But Rufus kept barking, and something in the way the larger figure had fallen, protective, curled around the smaller one, tugged at a part of Caleb he thought was dead. He cursed under his breath and started walking. As he got closer, details emerged. A woman, young, with dark hair matted with dust and sweat. Her dress was torn and filthy, her lips cracked and bleeding. She was clutching a child, a boy, maybe 4 or 5 years old, with desperate strength even in unconsciousness. Caleb knelt beside them, checking the woman's pulse first. Weak, but steady. Dehydrated. Exhausted, but alive. Then he touched the boy's forehead and swore again. The kid was burning up, his small face flushed red, his breathing rapid and labored. Damn it! Caleb had spent the last 3 years avoiding exactly this kind of situation. People who needed help, people who would expect things from him, people who would look at him with hope in their eyes. But he wasn't a monster, and these two would die if he left them here. He scooped up the boy first, shocked by how light he was, and carried him toward the house. The woman didn't stir when he came back for her, which worried him more than he wanted to admit. He got her over his shoulder in a fireman's carry and made the trek back to the house, Rufus trotting anxiously alongside. Inside, Caleb laid them both on the large sofa in the front room. The boy first, then the woman beside him. Even unconscious, her arm moved to pull the child closer. Caleb stood there for a moment, staring at them, wondering what the hell he'd just gotten himself into. Then he went to fetch water and clean cloths. The first thing Clara became aware of was wetness, cool and blessed, on her lips. Then came the realization that she was lying down somewhere soft, and the panic hit like a lightning strike. Noah! She tried to sit up, but strong hands pressed her back down. Easy. A man's voice, deep and rough. The boy's right here. You're both safe. Clara's eyes flew open. She was inside a house, dim and cool after the brutal sun. A stranger's face hovered above hers, weathered and hard-edged, with gray-blue eyes that held no warmth but no malice either. He was holding a cup of water. Noah, she rasped, right beside you. Drink first. Clara turned her head and saw her son lying next to her on the sofa, his small chest rising and falling. Still feverish, still too flushed, but breathing. Alive. The relief was so intense it hurt. She let the stranger help her drink, though her hands shook as she clutched the cup. The water was the most beautiful thing she'd ever tasted. When she'd drained it, he took the cup away and handed her another. This one she drank more slowly. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for... He needs a doctor. The man cut her off, nodding toward Noah. That fever's too high. I've been putting cool cloths on him, but it's not enough. Clara felt tears sting her eyes. I can't pay for a doctor. Didn't ask if you could. The man stood, unfolding to his full height, well over 6 feet, broad-shouldered and solid as the fence posts outside. Town's 12 miles. I'll hitch the wagon. Wait. Clara tried to sit up again, and this time he didn't stop her. The room spun briefly, then settled. Who are you? Where? Caleb Mercer. This is my ranch. He was already moving toward the door. You can explain how you ended up half dead in my pasture after we get the boy to Doc Morrison. I'm Clara Holloway, and he's Noah, my son, and... But Caleb was already gone, the screen door banging shut behind him. Clara looked down at Noah, brushing sweat-dampened hair from his forehead. His skin was still far too hot. Fear clawed at her chest, but underneath it was something else. The first fragile thread of hope she'd felt in days. They were inside, out of the sun. There was water, and this stern stranger, Caleb Mercer, was going to help them get Noah to a doctor. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had an hour ago. The next few hours passed in a blur. Caleb returned and wrapped Noah in a damp sheet before carrying him out to a wagon. Clara followed on unsteady legs, accepting Caleb's hand up onto the wooden seat without comment. The ride to town was agony. Every bump and rut in the road made her wince, imagining how it jostled Noah in the wagon bed. But Caleb drove as carefully as the urgency allowed, and when they finally reached the small town of Mercer's Bend, named, Clara would later learn, for Caleb's grandfather, he didn't waste time. He pulled up in front of a tidy white house with a doctor's shingle and was inside with Noah before Clara could even climb down. Doc Morrison was an older man with kind eyes and capable hands. He examined Noah while Clara hovered anxiously, and Caleb stood silent by the door. "Fever from infection," the doctor announced after several tense minutes. "See this cut on his arm? It's infected. That's what's causing the fever. I'll clean it properly. Give him something to bring the fever down. He'll need to stay quiet and drink plenty of fluids for the next few days, but he should be fine." Clara nearly collapsed with relief. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Doc Morrison looked at her more carefully then, taking in her gaunt face and ragged dress. "When's the last time you ate, Mrs. Holloway?" Yesterday, I think, or..." Time had gotten confused somewhere between desperation and survival. The doctor shook his head and glanced at Caleb. "You bringing them back to your place?" It wasn't really a question Clara had considered. She'd been too focused on Noah to think past the immediate crisis. Now she looked at Caleb, standing rigid by the door with his hat in his hands, and wondered what he'd say. Caleb's jaw worked for a moment. Then, "Yeah." "Good. Keep the boy quiet and cool. Make sure they both eat. I'll come by in 3 days to check on him." Doc Morrison started preparing a bottle of medicine. "No charge for this visit, but I'll expect payment for the house call." "I'll pay," Caleb said quietly. "I can work," Clara interjected quickly, pride flaring despite her exhaustion. "I can pay you back. I can cook, clean, mend, whatever you need. I'm not asking for charity, Mr. Mercer." For the first time, something flickered across Caleb's impassive face. Not quite a smile, but maybe the ghost of one. "We'll talk about it when the boy's better. Right now, let's just get you home." Home. The word sent an ache through Clara's chest, but she didn't correct him. The Mercer Ranch was larger than Clara had initially realized. As Caleb drove them back in the deepening twilight, she could make out pastures with cattle, several outbuildings, and the main house, a solid 2-story structure that spoke of old money and careful maintenance. Inside, Caleb carried Noah upstairs to a small bedroom that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The sheets were clean, though, and there was a window that caught the evening breeze. "You can take the room across the hall," Caleb said, not quite meeting Clara's eyes. "Bathroom's at the end. There's a pump in the kitchen if you want to wash up." "Mr. Mercer." "Caleb." "Caleb." Clara took a breath. "I meant what I said. About working. About paying you back. I won't be a burden." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara saw something in those gray-blue eyes that made her think he understood more about desperation than he let on. "We'll figure it out," he said finally. "Get some rest." After he left, Clara sat on the edge of Noah's bed, watching her son sleep. The medicine was already bringing his fever down, and the tight knot of fear in her chest was slowly loosening. They were safe. For tonight, at least, they were safe. She thought about the road that had brought them here, the death of her husband James in a mining accident 8 months ago, the landlord who'd evicted them when she couldn't pay rent, the cruel refusal of help from James's family. His brother Victor had actually laughed when she'd begged for assistance. "James chose poverty when he married you," Victor had said, his wife Ruth smirking beside him. "I'm not obligated to bail out his mistakes." So Clara had taken what little she had and started walking, hoping to reach her sister in Colorado. But Noah had gotten sick, their money had run out, and desperation had brought them to the edge of Caleb Mercer's land. To this unexpected shelter, Clara brushed her fingers over Noah's cooling forehead and allowed herself something she hadn't felt in months, the possibility that maybe, somehow, they would be okay. No. Downstairs, Caleb stood in his kitchen, staring at the pot of coffee he'd just made without remembering why he'd wanted it. He had strangers in his house, a woman and child. The first people to sleep under his roof since... He cut that thought off savagely and poured the coffee down the sink. This was temporary. He'd help them get back on their feet, and they'd move on. Maybe a week, 2 at most. He could handle that. He didn't have to get attached, didn't have to care. Except the woman, Clara, had looked at him with those dark eyes full of fierce gratitude and fiercer pride, and something in his carefully constructed isolation had cracked just a little. Caleb cursed under his breath and headed for the barn. There was always work to do, and work meant he didn't have to think, But as he settled into repairing the tack he'd abandoned earlier, he couldn't quite shake the image of Clara curled protectively around her son, or the weight of the boy in his arms, or the way his house had felt different with life in it again. It scared him more than he wanted to admit. Clara woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of a rooster crowing. For a disoriented moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it came back in a rush. The collapse, the rescue, Noah's fever, the stern rancher who'd saved them both. She sat up quickly, wincing at the protest of muscles pushed too hard for too long, and hurried across the hall to check on Noah. He was still asleep, but his forehead was cool to the touch, and his breathing was deep and steady. The infection medicine had worked. Clara felt tears of relief sting her eyes as she bent to kiss his forehead. "Thank you," she whispered to the universe, to fate, to whatever force had led them to Caleb Mercer's land. Downstairs, she found the kitchen empty, but the coffee pot still warm. A note in rough handwriting was propped against it. "Help yourself. I'm in the north pasture." Clara poured coffee and drank it black, savoring the warmth and strength of it. Then she explored the kitchen, taking stock. It was clean, but clearly the domain of a man who cooked only for survival, not pleasure. The pantry held basics: flour, beans, coffee, salt pork, but nothing fresh, nothing that spoke of care or variety. She could work with this. By the time Caleb returned for lunch, Clara had scrubbed the kitchen until it gleamed, baked bread from the flour she'd found, and made a soup from dried beans and the vegetables she'd discovered in a neglected garden patch behind the house. Caleb stopped in the doorway, staring at the transformed kitchen with something that might have been shock. "I told you," Clara said, ladling soup into a bowl. "I can work. I can earn my keep." He took the bowl without a word and sat at the table. Clara waited, anxiety coiling in her stomach. What if he was angry? What if he thought she was overstepping? But after the first spoonful, Caleb looked up at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "It's good. Thank you." "Noah?" "Sleeping. The fever's gone." "Dar soak." Caleb nodded and returned to his soup. They ate in silence, but it wasn't entirely uncomfortable. Clara found herself studying him, the lines around his eyes that spoke of too much sun and too much sorrow, the careful way he moved, the silence that seemed less like rudeness and more like armor. "How long have you lived here alone?" she asked quietly. His spoon paused halfway to his mouth. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, 3 years. "It's a lot of land for one person." "I manage." Clara wanted to ask more. Wanted to know what had happened to make this strong, capable man choose such profound isolation. But she recognized the walls when she saw them. She'd built enough of her own. "I'll stay out of your way," she said instead. "Noah and I will leave as soon as he's well enough to travel. We're headed to Colorado. My sister's there." Caleb set down his spoon and looked at her directly. "You got money for the journey?" Clara's cheeks burned. "I'll figure something out. That's not an answer. I'll work. I'll save. How?" Caleb's voice wasn't unkind, just brutally practical. "You're a day's walk from the nearest town. You have a sick child and no resources. What exactly is your plan, Mrs. Holloway?" The truth stuck in Clara's throat, sharp and humiliating. She didn't have a plan. She'd had hope and desperation, and that had gotten her here, but it wouldn't get her to Colorado. "I don't know," she whispered. Caleb studied her for a long moment, then he pushed back from the table and stood. "Doc Morrison's coming by tomorrow to check on the boy. Until then, you and Noah stay put. Rest, eat. We'll figure out the next step after that." "I can't just—" "You can." He picked up his hat from the table. "And you will. That boy needs you healthy, not running yourself into the ground trying to prove something." Before Clara could argue, he was gone, the screen door closing softly behind him. Clara sat alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of her morning's work, and felt something break inside her chest. Not grief exactly, something more complicated. The terrible, dangerous warmth of being cared for, even in this gruff, distant way. She put her face in her hands and cried as quietly as she could manage, for the first time since James had died. The next 3 days fell into a rhythm. Clara woke early before Caleb left for the day's work. She made coffee and breakfast, biscuits, eggs from the chickens she'd discovered, salt pork fried crisp. Caleb ate without comment, but always finished everything on his plate. While Noah recovered upstairs, Clara worked. She cleaned years of bachelor neglect from the house, room by room. She mended Caleb's shirts, sewn back buttons, patched the holes that spoke of hard use and no one to care. She revived the kitchen garden, coaxing life from plants that had been left to struggle. And she cooked. Bread and stew and biscuits and pie made from preserves she found in the cellar. Nothing fancy, but good and solid and made with care. Caleb never asked her to do any of it, never commented beyond the occasional "it's good" at meals. But Clara noticed things. The way he started coming in for lunch instead of eating alone in the fields. The way he'd sometimes pause in a doorway as if surprised to find his house so changed. Doc Morrison came on the third day and pronounced Noah fully recovered. "Whatever you're feeding him, keep it up," he told Clara with a smile. "He's already put on weight." After the doctor left, Clara found Caleb in the barn, repairing a saddle. "Doc Morrison says Noah's well," she announced. Caleb's hands stilled on the leather. "That's good." "Yes." Clara took a breath. "So we'll leave in the morning. I've calculated what I owe you for the doctor, the food, the shelter. I'll send payment once I'm settled with my sister." Caleb set down the saddle and turned to face her. "You got a way to get there?" "We'll walk to town and find work. Save up for—" "Winter's coming in 6 weeks." Clara blinked. "I'm aware." "Colorado's a hard journey in good weather. Damn near impossible with a child once the cold sets in." "We'll manage." "Like you managed before you collapsed in my field?" The words hit like a slap, but Clara lifted her chin. "That won't happen again." Caleb's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes, frustration maybe, or concern he didn't know how to express. "You're stubborn." "I'm practical. We've imposed enough." "What if I don't want you to go?" Clara's breath caught. "What?" Caleb looked away, jaw working. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. "House hasn't been this clean in 3 years. Haven't eaten this well since before. You're a good worker, better than any ranch hand I could hire." "You want us to stay?" Clara's heart was pounding. "I'm offering you a job." Caleb met her eyes again. "Cook, clean, help with the house. I'll pay you fair wages, provide room and board for you and the boy. You can save up properly for Colorado. Leave in the spring when the weather's better." It was practical, sensible, exactly what Clara needed. So why did it feel like something more? "What about Noah?" she asked carefully. "He's young. He can be noisy." Something crossed Caleb's face, pain maybe, or memory. "I know what children are like." There was a story there, Clara thought, a wound that hadn't healed, but she didn't press. "A few months," she clarified, "until spring? Until you've saved enough to get to your sister safely. Could be spring, could be longer. Your choice." Clara thought about the long, uncertain road to Colorado, about winter coming and Noah still too thin, too fragile, about the security of walls and steady work and a man who, for all his gruffness, had shown them more kindness than James's own family. "Okay," she said. "We'll stay." Caleb nodded once, satisfied, and returned to his saddle work. "Good. Now go inside. You've been on your feet all day." As Clara walked back to the house, she tried to ignore the flutter of something in her chest that felt dangerously like relief, like belonging. This was temporary, she reminded herself. A few months of work, nothing more. But when she looked back at the barn and saw Caleb silhouetted in the doorway, solid and steady as the land itself, she couldn't quite convince herself that's all it was. That night, after Noah was asleep, Clara sat on the porch and watched the stars emerge. The air was cooling, and somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly. It was peaceful in a way she'd forgotten existed. The screen door creaked, and Caleb emerged with 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one without a word and sat in the other rocking chair, a careful distance away. They drank in silence for a while. Then Clara said quietly, "Can I ask you something?" "Depends on the question." "Why did you help us? Really?" Caleb was quiet for so long Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Didn't have much choice. You'd have died otherwise." "You could have taken us to town and left us there." "Could have." He took a sip of coffee. Didn't want to. Why? Another long pause. House was too quiet. Clara heard the layers in those 4 words, the loneliness, the grief, the 3 years of isolation that had carved away at him. She wanted to ask what had happened, who he'd lost, but the question felt too intrusive. Instead, she said, "Thank you. For the job. For everything." Caleb nodded once. "You've earned it." They sat together in comfortable silence, and Clara felt something shift between them, a tentative bridge across the careful distance they'd both maintained. Neither of them reached for more, but the possibility hung in the air like the smell of coming rain. Inside, Noah called out in his sleep, and Clara rose to check on him. At the door, she paused and looked back at Caleb, still sitting with his coffee, staring out at the dark land. "Good night, Caleb." "Good night, Clara." It was the first time he'd used her given name. The sound of it, rough and careful in his voice, stayed with her long after she'd tucked Noah back in and lay down in her own bed. Outside her window, the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and beautiful, and Clara Holloway fell asleep thinking that maybe, just maybe, the road that had brought her here had been leading somewhere after all. The weeks that followed settled into something that felt almost like normalcy. Clara rose with the sun and made breakfast. Caleb ate quickly and headed out to work the land, mending fences, tending cattle, the endless tasks that came with running a ranch alone. Clara cleaned, cooked, and slowly brought life back to a house that had been more tomb than home. Noah, fully recovered, began to explore the ranch with the boundless energy of a healthy 4-year-old. He collected eggs from the chickens, chased Rufus through the yard, and talked endlessly about everything he saw. At first, Caleb seemed uncertain around the boy, stiff and distant, like he didn't know what to do with all that noise and energy. But Noah was undeterred by adult awkwardness. He followed Caleb to the barn, asked 1,000 questions about horses and cattle and ropes, and slowly, carefully, began to work his way under the rancher's defenses. One afternoon, Clara looked out the kitchen window and stopped, dish towel in hand. Caleb was in the corral, and Noah was perched on the fence, watching as Caleb worked with a young horse. The rancher was talking, actually talking, explaining something about reading the animal's body language. Noah listened with intense concentration, then asked a question Clara couldn't hear. Caleb answered, and something that might have been a smile crossed his weathered face. Clara's throat tightened. She hadn't realized how much Noah needed this, a man's steady presence, someone to look up to. James had been gone so long now that Noah's memories of his father were fading into something more dream than reality. And she hadn't realized, until this moment, how much Caleb needed it too. The animation in his face, the patience in his movements. This was a man who'd been good at something once, maybe good at being needed, and had forgotten what that felt like. The thought scared her, because caring about Caleb Mercer, actually caring, not just being grateful, felt dangerous. They had a business arrangement, a temporary solution to mutual problems. Getting attached would only make leaving harder. But as Clara watched Caleb lift Noah onto the young horse's back, one hand steadying the boy's small frame, while the other gentled the animal, she wondered if it was already too late to protect her heart. The trouble arrived on a Saturday afternoon in October, when the leaves were just starting to turn and the air held the first real bite of autumn. Clara was in the garden, harvesting the last of the squash, when she heard the sound of an approaching carriage. Visitors were rare. The ranch was too remote, and Caleb too much of a hermit. So she straightened, wiping dirt from her hands, and watched as an expensive black carriage pulled up to the house. The man who emerged was dressed too fine for ranch country, city clothes, expensive and new. He was tall, dark-haired, with James's sharp features, but none of his warmth. Recognition hit Clara like a fist to the stomach. Victor Holloway, her dead husband's brother, the man who'd refused to help them when they needed it most. "Victor." Clara's voice came out steady despite the sudden pounding of her heart. "What are you doing here?" Victor's eyes swept over her, taking in the dirt on her dress, the garden tools in her hands, the modest house behind her, and his lip curled with distaste. "I've been looking for you, Clara. You've been difficult to find." "I didn't want to be found." "Clearly." He glanced toward the house. "Where's Noah?" As if summoned, her son came running around the corner of the barn, Rufus at his heels. He stopped when he saw the stranger pressing close to Clara's side. "Mama?" "It's all right, sweetheart." Clara put a protective hand on his shoulder, but her eyes stayed on Victor. You still haven't answered my question. What do you want? Victor's expression shifted into something that might have been concern if Clara didn't know him better. I want to make amends, Clara. I was hasty when you came to me before. Thoughtless. I've had time to reconsider. Reconsider what? My obligations to my brother's widow and child. He took a step closer, and Clara fought the urge to back away. Your family, Clara. You shouldn't be living like this, working as a servant on some stranger's ranch. Come home with me. I'll provide for you properly. Clara's blood ran cold. No. Be reasonable. I said no, Victor. We don't need your help. We're fine here. Are you? Victor's voice hardened. Living in sin with a man you're not married to? Letting my nephew grow up in this situation? What would James think? Before Clara could respond, a new voice cut across the yard. That's enough. Caleb emerged from the barn, and though his voice was quiet, there was steel underneath. He crossed the yard in long strides, positioning himself between Clara and Victor. This is a private conversation, Victor said icily. Not when it's happening on my land. Caleb's face was impassive, but his body language was anything but. Mrs. Holloway works for me. That makes this my business. Mrs. Holloway is my late brother's widow, which makes her my business. Victor's eyes narrowed. And I'm here to offer her proper protection, a decent home for herself and the boy, unless you're claiming to offer something more respectable. The implication hung in the air, ugly and clear. Caleb's hands clenched into fists, but his voice remained level. What Mrs. Holloway chooses is her decision, but she's already given you her answer. An answer made under duress, perhaps, or improper influence. Victor shifted his attention back to Clara. I'm staying at the hotel in Mercer's Bend. I'll be there for 3 days. When you come to your senses, Clara, I'll be waiting. He tipped his hat, a mockery of courtesy, and climbed back into his carriage. As it pulled away, Clara felt Noah trembling against her side and realized she was shaking too. He's gone, Caleb said quietly. It's okay. But it wasn't okay. Clara could see it in the rigid set of Caleb's shoulders, the way his jaw was clenched tight enough to ache. And she knew, with cold certainty, that Victor Holloway hadn't traveled all this way just to make amends. He wanted something, and whatever it was going to tear apart the fragile peace they'd built. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in the darkness of her room, listening to Noah's soft breathing from across the hall and replaying Victor's visit over and over in her mind. The way he'd looked at her, not with concern, but with calculation. The pointed jabs about respectability and sin, the too convenient timing of his sudden change of heart. Victor Holloway had never done anything that didn't benefit himself. 8 months ago, he'd turned her away without a second thought. So why now? What had changed? Clara rose and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, padding quietly downstairs. She was surprised to find lamplight spilling from the kitchen. Caleb sat at the table with a ledger open in front of him, but he wasn't writing. He was just staring at the pages, a cup of untouched coffee at his elbow. Can't sleep either? Clara asked softly. Caleb looked up, and for a moment something raw and unguarded crossed his face before the walls came back up. Lot on my mind. May I? Clara gestured to the chair across from him. He nodded, and she sat, pulling the shawl tighter. The kitchen was warm from the residual heat of the stove, but she felt cold all the way through. I'm sorry about Victor, she said, about what he implied. I never meant to bring that kind of trouble to your door. Not your fault, Caleb closed the ledger. Men like that see what they want to see. He's right, though, isn't he, about how it looks? A widow living under an unmarried man's roof. You work for me. There's nothing improper about that. You know it doesn't matter what's actually happening. It matters what people think. Clara twisted the edge of her shawl between her fingers. I've made things difficult for you. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, 3 years ago, I had a wife. Clara's breath caught. She'd suspected something like this, the empty rooms upstairs, the careful way he avoided certain topics. But hearing him say it made it real. Her name was Sarah. We'd been married 2 years. She was carrying our first child. Caleb's voice was flat, carefully controlled. There were complications. The baby came too early. Neither of them made it. Caleb, I tell you this, he continued, talking over her sympathy, because people in town talked then too. Blamed me for working her too hard, for not getting her to a doctor sooner. Didn't matter that Sarah made her own choices, that she wanted to be here on the ranch. They decided I'd killed her through neglect, and that was that. He finally looked at Clara directly, and the pain in his eyes was so profound it hurt to witness. Point is, people will talk no matter what you do. I learned to stop caring what they think. You might want to do the same. Clara absorbed this, understanding now the depth of his isolation. He hadn't just lost his wife and child. He'd lost his place in the community, his reputation, everything that made a man belong somewhere. Is that why you live out here alone? She asked gently. Easier than fighting ghosts. Caleb picked up his coffee, found it cold, and set it back down. But having you and Noah here, it's been good. Better than I expected. Don't let Victor Holloway take that away. The confession was so unlike him, so vulnerable, that Clara felt her throat tighten. I don't want to leave, but I also don't want to cause you more trouble than you've already had. Then stay. Caleb's voice was firm. Whatever Victor's planning, we'll handle it. You sound sure he's planning something. Men don't travel hundreds of miles to make amends. They do it to collect debts. Caleb stood and moved to the stove, dumping his cold coffee and pouring fresh. Question is, what does he think you owe him? That was what had been nagging at Clara, too. She'd married James against his family's wishes, a poor ranch hand's daughter marrying a Holloway, even the black sheep of the family. Victor had made his disapproval clear from the start. When James died, Victor had been almost gleeful in his refusal to help. So why come now? Why offer support he'd denied when she desperately needed it? I don't know, Clara admitted, but you're right. There's something he wants. They sat together in the warm kitchen, and Clara felt the weight of secrets and survival pressing down on both of them. Two people running from different kinds of grief, finding unexpected shelter in each other's company. Thank you, she said quietly, for telling me about Sarah. I know that wasn't easy. Caleb's jaw worked. Hasn't talked about her in 3 years. Figured you should know why I am the way I am. You're a good man, Caleb Mercer. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in the air between them. Not quite attraction, but the possibility of it. The dangerous recognition that under different circumstances, in another life, there might be something more than gratitude and necessity holding them together. Clara stood quickly, before that thought could take root. I should get back to bed. Morning comes early. Clara, Caleb's voice stopped her at the door. Whatever happens with Victor, you and Noah have a place here, long as you want it. The words wrapped around her heart like a promise, and Clara carried them upstairs with her, tucking them away like a treasure she didn't quite dare to claim. The next morning brought Sunday, which meant no ranch work. Caleb spent the morning in the barn anyway, finding things to repair that didn't need repairing, while Clara tried to focus on mending and failed. Noah played with Rufus in the yard, his laughter carrying through the open windows, and Clara found herself watching him with a mixture of love and fear. What if Victor tried to take him? Legally, did he have any claim? James had been Noah's father, which made Victor his uncle. Could family rights override a mother's claim, especially if that mother was living in circumstances society deemed questionable? The uncertainty gnawed at her until she couldn't sit still. She needed answers, and there was only one place to get them. Caleb? She found him in the barn, allegedly oiling a saddle that looked perfectly maintained already. I need to go into town. He looked up sharply. Why? I need to speak with someone about the law, about what rights Victor might have regarding Noah. Caleb set down the saddle. You think he'd try to take the boy? I don't know what he'd try. That's the problem. Clara wrapped her arms around herself. I need to know where I stand legally. I need to be prepared. There's a lawyer in town, Samuel Cooper. He's honest, which is rare. Caleb wiped his hands on a rag. I'll drive you. You don't have to, Bob. I'm driving you. There was no point arguing when Caleb used that tone. 20 minutes later, they were in the wagon heading toward Mercer's Bend, Noah tucked between them on the seat. Clara tried to ignore how domestic it felt, how right. the three of them together like a family that might actually belong to each other. The town was quiet on Sunday morning, most folks at church. Caleb pulled up in front of a small office with Samuel Cooper, attorney at law, painted on the window. "I'll wait with Noah," Caleb said. "Take your time." Clara nodded and climbed down, her heart hammering. She'd never needed a lawyer before, never dealt with anything this frightening. But for Noah, she'd walked through fire. Samuel Cooper turned out to be a thin man in his 50s with kind eyes and ink-stained fingers. He listened to Clara's story without interruption, occasionally making notes, his expression growing more serious as she explained about Victor's sudden appearance and her fears about his intentions. When she finished, Cooper sat back and steepled his fingers. "Mrs. Holloway, I'll be frank with you. Your situation is complicated." "How so?" "Legally, as Noah's mother, you have primary custody rights. But those rights aren't absolute, especially for a widow. If Victor Holloway were to challenge your fitness as a parent, say by claiming you're living in immoral circumstances or unable to provide proper care, a judge might decide the child would be better served by family with more resources." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "But I'm his mother. I've never neglected him, never—" "I'm not saying you have. I'm saying that's the argument Victor could make. And depending on the judge, it might work." Cooper's expression was sympathetic. "The fact that you're employed and housed is in your favor. But the fact that you're living in an unmarried man's home, no matter how respectable the arrangement actually is, could be used against you." "So what do I do?" Cooper was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing his words. "The safest option would be to marry. A stable marriage would eliminate most of Victor's potential arguments about your living situation." Clara laughed bitterly. "I don't have anyone to marry, Mr. Cooper. That's rather the problem." "Perhaps not, but you do have an employer who seems to care about you and the boy." Cooper held up a hand before Clara could protest. "I'm not suggesting anything improper, Mrs. Holloway. I'm simply pointing out that a marriage of convenience, a practical arrangement between two people who need what the other can offer, is not unheard of." The idea was so preposterous that Clara didn't know how to respond. Marry Caleb? A man she'd known for barely a month? A man still grieving his dead wife? "I couldn't ask that of him," she said finally. "Then don't ask. I'm just telling you what would most effectively protect your rights to Noah." Cooper pulled out a document from his desk drawer. "In the meantime, I can draw up a statement of custody that might help. It won't prevent Victor from challenging you in court, but it would establish your legal claim." "How much will that cost?" "Consider it a courtesy. Caleb Mercer did my son a good turn once. I owe him." As Clara left the office with the promised document to be ready in a few days, her mind was reeling. Marriage. To Caleb. It was absurd. Impossible. Except it wasn't, was it? People married for practical reasons all the time. For land, for money, for protection. Why not for a child's safety? She found Caleb and Noah at the general store, where Caleb was buying Noah a peppermint stick despite the boy's protests that he didn't need it. "It's a gift," Caleb was saying gruffly. "Gifts don't need reasons." Noah took the candy with shining eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Caleb." The pure joy on her son's face, the awkward gentleness in Caleb's expression, it made Clara's chest ache. Noah was already getting attached. They both were. What would happen when they had to leave? When winter passed and Clara had saved enough for Colorado? Would it hurt more then, having had this taste of something like family? On the ride home, Clara was quiet, turning Cooper's words over in her mind. Caleb didn't press her to talk, and Noah chattered enough for all of them about the peppermint stick and the horses they'd seen, and whether Rufus might like a peppermint stick too. That night, after Noah was in bed, Clara sat on the porch again, and again Caleb joined her with coffee. It was becoming a ritual, these quiet evenings together. "What did the lawyer say?" Caleb asked finally. Clara took a breath. "He said that as Noah's mother, I have custody rights, but he also said that Victor could challenge those rights if he can prove I'm unfit or living in immoral circumstances." Caleb's hand tightened on his cup. "That's what he's planning then, to take Noah." "Maybe. Or maybe just to threaten it until I agree to whatever he actually wants." Clara set down her coffee. "Mr. Cooper suggested a solution, one that would eliminate Victor's arguments about my living situation." "What kind of solution?" Clara made herself meet his eyes. Marriage. He said if I were married, properly married, Victor would have no legal standing to challenge my custody. The silence that followed was so profound that Clara could hear her own heartbeat. Caleb's face was unreadable in the lamplight. He's right, Caleb said finally. That would solve the problem. Yes, but I don't... Clara stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. Don't have anyone to marry, don't want to impose, don't dare to hope you might consider it. I could do it. Clara's head snapped up. What? Caleb was staring out at the dark land, his jaw set. Marry you, for Noah's sake, to keep him safe. Caleb, I didn't come out here to manipulate you into... I know. He finally looked at her. But it makes sense, doesn't it? You need protection for Noah. I need... He paused, searching for words. Company. Help. Someone to make this place feel less like a grave. It was the most brutally honest thing Clara had ever heard. No romance, no pretense, just two broken people acknowledging what they could offer each other. It would be a real marriage, Clara said slowly, testing the idea. Legally binding. Yes. But not, She felt her cheeks burn. It would be whatever we agreed to, Caleb said quietly. I'm not asking for anything you don't want to give. Just a partnership. A way to protect what we've both lost too much to lose again. Clara thought about Noah, asleep upstairs, safe and happy for the first time since James died. She thought about Victor's calculating eyes and the law's indifference to a mother's love. She thought about the coming winter and the impossible journey to Colorado and how tired she was of running. Are you sure? She whispered. No. Caleb's honesty was startling. But I'm sure that I don't want you to leave. I'm sure that Noah deserves better than to be taken by a man who only wants him for whatever scheme he's running, and I'm sure that this ranch needs life in it more than I need to keep hiding from mine. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even particularly romantic. But it was real and solid, and more than Clara had had in a very long time. Okay, she heard herself say. If you're sure you want this, then... Okay. Yes. Caleb nodded once, as if they'd just agreed on the price of cattle rather than the rest of their lives. I'll talk to the minister tomorrow. We can do it quick and quiet. No fuss. Caleb. Clara reached out and touched his hand, the first time she'd initiated contact between them. Thank you for doing this. For Noah. His hand turned under hers, calloused and warm, and squeezed gently. For both of you. And for me too, if I'm being honest. They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped, staring out at the star-filled sky. Clara tried to feel what she was supposed to feel, fear maybe or uncertainty, but all she felt was a strange, tentative peace. This wasn't the marriage she'd imagined as a girl, but maybe that was all right. Maybe practical and honest was enough to build something good. The next morning, Clara woke to find Caleb already gone. A note on the kitchen table said he'd ridden into town to make arrangements. Clara made breakfast mechanically, her mind spinning with the reality of what she'd agreed to. She was going to marry Caleb Mercer. In a few days, she'd be Mrs. Mercer instead of Mrs. Holloway. Noah would have a father again, even if that relationship was more formal than biological. They'd be a family, at least on paper. Mama? Noah appeared in the kitchen doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Where's Mr. Caleb? He had to go to town, sweetheart. He'll be back later. Noah climbed into his chair and accepted the oatmeal Clara set before him. Mama, can we stay here? I like it here. Clara's throat tightened. Would you like that? Yes! Noah's enthusiasm was immediate and complete. Mr. Caleb showed me how to rope fence posts, and Rufus likes me, and there's so many places to explore, and... Noah. Clara sat down across from him. How would you feel if Mr. Caleb became more than just our employer? If he became... family? Noah considered this with the seriousness only a 4-year-old could muster. Like a new papa. Something like that. Would that be all right with you? Would we get to stay forever? Yes. Noah beamed. Then yes, I want that. It was that simple for him. Clara wished she could share his uncomplicated joy. But the weight of what she was doing, marrying a virtual stranger out of necessity rather than love, sat heavy in her chest. When Caleb returned that afternoon, he found Clara in the kitchen kneading bread dough with more force than necessary. Minister can do it Thursday afternoon, he announced without preamble. Needs 2 witnesses. I figured Doc Morrison and Samuel Cooper. Clara's hands stilled in the dough. Thursday, 3 days away. That's fast. No point waiting, Caleb pulled off his hat. Unless you've changed your mind. No, I haven't. Clara resumed kneading. I told Noah. He's happy about it. Something crossed Caleb's face. Surprise, maybe, or pleasure. Good. That's good. They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Then Caleb cleared his throat. There's things we should probably discuss about how this will work. All right. You and Noah can stay in the rooms you're in now, if you prefer. Or there's the master bedroom. It's bigger. Whichever you're comfortable with. Clara understood what he was really saying, that he wouldn't expect her to share his bed just because they'd be married. Relief and something else. Something she didn't want to examine too closely warred in her chest. The rooms we have are fine, she said. For now. Caleb nodded. I'll provide for you and Noah. You'll have access to the household accounts, make decisions about the house and food. It'll be your home, not just my ranch. And in return, keep doing what you're doing. Make this place feel lived in. Help me remember how to be human. He said it lightly, but Clara heard the truth underneath. What about when Noah's older? When he asks questions about us? We tell him the truth, that we married to protect him and to help each other, that sometimes families are built on necessity before they're built on love. Caleb met her eyes. If love comes later, that's a gift. If it doesn't, at least we'll have been honest. It was such a practical, measured approach to something that should have been romantic. But Clara found herself appreciating the honesty. There would be no false promises, no expectations that couldn't be met. Okay, she said. Thursday then. Caleb left to tend to the horses, and Clara finished her bread, trying to imagine herself as Mrs. Caleb Mercer, trying to picture a future built on partnership rather than passion. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear the approaching horse until Rufus started barking. Clara looked up to see a woman riding toward the house, stylishly dressed, with an expensive riding habit and perfectly coiffed blonde hair. The woman dismounted with practiced grace and approached the porch where Clara stood wiping flour from her hands. You must be Clara Holloway, the woman said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. I'm Ruth Holloway, Victor's wife. Clara's guard went up immediately. Mrs. Holloway, what brings you here? May I come in? I'd like to speak with you privately. Every instinct screamed at Clara to refuse, but curiosity won out. She led Ruth into the parlor, the one room she hadn't managed to completely transform yet, and offered tea, which Ruth declined. I'll be direct, Ruth said, settling into a chair, as if she owned it. Victor sent me to make you an offer. I'm listening. Come back with us. You and Noah. Victor will set you up in a house in town, your own house, properly staffed. He'll provide a generous allowance and ensure Noah has the best education money can buy. It sounded wonderful, impossibly generous. Which meant there was a catch. And what does Victor get in return? Clara asked. Ruth's smile sharpened. Noah, eventually. Victor and I haven't been blessed with children of our own, you see. We'd like to raise Noah as our own son and heir. When he comes of age, he'll inherit the Holloway estate. There it was. The truth Clara had suspected but hoped was wrong. You want to take my son. We want to give him opportunities you never could. Ruth's voice was smooth as silk. A life of privilege and education, the Holloway name and fortune. Surely you can see that's better than raising him on a ranch doing manual labor. Noah is my son. He's not for sale. No one's suggesting selling him, dear. This is about doing what's best for the child. Unless you'd rather he grow up here watching his mother play house with a stranger? Ruth's eyes glittered. Oh yes, we've heard about your arrangement with Mr. Mercer. How long do you think that will last? How long before he tires of playing father to another man's child? Clara stood, rage burning through her veins. Get out! Clara, get out! Clara's voice was deadly quiet. You tell Victor that Noah is my son, and he will stay my son. You can't have him. Not now, not ever. Ruth rose with infuriating composure. You're making a mistake. Victor can make this very difficult for you if you refuse to be reasonable. Let him try. After Ruth left, Clara stood in the parlor, shaking with fury and fear. So that was Victor's plan. He wanted Noah as an heir, a replacement for the children he couldn't have himself, and he was willing to use the law, social pressure, and her own poverty against her to get what he wanted. When Caleb came in from the barn, he found Clara sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. What happened? He asked immediately. Clara told him about Ruth's visit, about the offer and the thinly veiled threats. By the time she finished, Caleb's face was carved from stone. They want to take him, Clara whispered. They want to take my baby and raise him as theirs. That's not going to happen. You heard what the lawyer said. They have money, influence. I'm just a widow living on charity. You're about to be my wife. Caleb knelt in front of her chair, forcing her to meet his eyes. And that means Noah will be my responsibility too. Victor Holloway can bring all the lawyers and money he wants. He's not taking that boy. The fierce protectiveness in his voice broke something open in Clara's chest. This wasn't just about helping anymore. Somewhere in the past weeks, Caleb had started to care. Really care. I'm scared, she admitted. Me too. Caleb's honesty was as solid as his presence. But we're going to fight this together. Thursday, we get married. Then we show Victor Holloway exactly what he's up against. Clara nodded, drawing strength from his certainty, even as fear gnawed at her. 3 more days. 3 more days until their marriage was real and legal and could stand between Victor and Noah. She just hoped it would be enough. Thursday morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of autumn day that promised winter wasn't far behind. Clara stood in front of the small mirror in her room, trying to recognize the woman staring back at her. She'd borrowed a dress from the general store. Nothing fancy, just a simple blue cotton that happened to fit, and pinned her dark hair up as best she could. No veil, no flowers, no wedding breakfast with family and friends, just a practical arrangement to protect her son. Noah appeared in the doorway, freshly scrubbed and wearing the new shirt Caleb had bought him for the occasion. Mama, you look pretty. Clara's throat tightened. Thank you, sweetheart. Are you ready? Will Mr. Caleb be my papa after today? Yes. If you want him to be. Noah nodded solemnly. I want that. I think Papa James would like Mr. Caleb. The simple faith in those words nearly undid Clara. She gathered Noah into her arms, breathing in the little boy's smell of soap and sunshine. I think so too, baby. I think so too. Downstairs, Caleb was waiting in the parlor wearing what was clearly his best suit, dark and well-tailored but showing its age. He'd shaved and combed his hair back, and when he looked up at Clara descending the stairs, something flickered in his eyes that made her breath catch. You look nice, he said gruffly. So do you. They stood there awkwardly until Noah broke the tension by running to Caleb and grabbing his hand. Are we going now? I've never been to a wedding before. Caleb's expression softened as he looked down at the boy. Neither have I. Well, except my own. But that was a long time ago. He glanced at Clara. Wagon's ready when you are. The ride to town was quiet. Noah chattered about everything and nothing, while Clara and Caleb sat side by side, not touching, both lost in their own thoughts. Clara wondered what he was thinking, if he was regretting this already. If Sarah's memory sat between them like a ghost. Mercer's Bend was busier than Clara had expected for a Thursday afternoon. Word had apparently spread about the rancher's unexpected marriage, because people stopped on the boardwalk to stare as Caleb pulled the wagon up in front of the small church. Let them look, Caleb muttered, helping Clara down. His hand was warm and steady on hers. They'll have something new to gossip about next week. Inside the church, Doc Morrison and Samuel Cooper were waiting, along with the minister, a portly man named Reverend Hayes, who looked decidedly uncomfortable with the whole situation. Mr. Mercer, Mrs. Holloway. He nodded to each of them. This is rather sudden, isn't it? Need for speed isn't lack of commitment, Reverend, Caleb said evenly. No, of course not. I just want to ensure you both understand the seriousness of the vows you're about to take. We understand, Clara said quietly. We wouldn't be here otherwise. The ceremony itself was brief and businesslike. The Reverend recited the traditional words while Clara and Caleb stood before him, Noah tucked between them. When it came time for the vows, Caleb's voice was steady as stone. I, Caleb James Mercer, take you, Clara Ann Holloway, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. Clara repeated the words, her voice softer, but no less certain. I, Clara Ann Holloway, take you, Caleb James Mercer, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. The Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, and there was an awkward moment where tradition demanded a kiss. Caleb hesitated, then leaned in and pressed his lips to Clara's forehead, tender and chaste and somehow more intimate than anything else could have been. Congratulations, Doc Morrison said warmly, shaking Caleb's hand. You've got yourself a fine woman, Caleb. I know, Caleb replied, and the simple honesty in his voice made Clara's eyes sting. Samuel Cooper hugged Clara gently. This was the right choice. You'll see. As they signed the marriage certificate, making it legal and binding, Clara felt the weight of what they'd just done settle over her. She was married again, to a man she barely knew, a man who'd agreed to this out of duty and loneliness rather than love. But when Caleb took her hand to help her back into the wagon, and Noah threw his arms around both their legs, declaring them a real family now, Clara thought maybe that would be enough. They were halfway home when they saw the other wagon approaching. Clara recognized the expensive black carriage immediately, and her stomach dropped. Victor. Caleb saw it too, and his jaw tightened, but he didn't slow down. As the carriages drew alongside each other on the narrow road, Victor called out for them to stop. Caleb, Clara said softly, and he pulled up the horses. Victor climbed down from his carriage, Ruth beside him, both dressed as if they were attending a society function rather than confronting people on a dusty road. Clara. Victor's voice was oily with false concern. I heard the most peculiar rumor in town. Surely you haven't done something as foolish as marry this rancher. It's not a rumor, Clara said, lifting her chin. Caleb and I were married this afternoon, legally and properly. Ruth's face went white with fury, but Victor just laughed, a cold, calculating sound. How convenient, and how incredibly transparent. You think a hasty marriage will protect you? It's not hasty, Caleb cut in, his voice hard. It's sensible. Clara needed a husband. I needed a wife. Now she has legal protection, and Noah has a father. What concern is it of yours? Every concern, when it involves my nephew. Victor's eyes glittered. You see, I've been doing some research, Mr. Mercer, about you and your history, about the wife you lost due to your negligence, about how the town blamed you for her death and that of your unborn child. Caleb went rigid beside Clara, his hands white-knuckled on the reins. What does that have to do with anything? Clara demanded. Everything, my dear. Because a man who couldn't keep his own wife and child safe certainly can't be trusted with someone else's son. I'll be petitioning the court for custody of Noah on the grounds that you've married an unfit guardian. You can't, Clara started, but Victor talked over her. I absolutely can, and I will. My lawyers are already drawing up the papers. You'll be served within the week. Victor's smile was vicious. You should have taken my generous offer, Clara. Now you'll lose everything. He climbed back into his carriage, and Ruth threw Clara one last triumphant look before they drove away in a cloud of dust. Clara sat frozen, the joy of the wedding dissolving into ash. Beside her, Caleb was equally still, staring at the road ahead. Noah, Clara said quietly, why don't you ride in the back for a bit? I need to talk to Caleb. Once Noah had clambered into the wagon bed with Rufus, Clara turned to her new husband. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry he brought up Sarah, and it's not your fault. Caleb's voice was flat. And he's not wrong. The whole town blamed me for what happened. Some still do. But it wasn't your fault. You said there were complications. I was the husband. I was supposed to protect her. Caleb finally looked at Clara, and the pain in his eyes was staggering. Sarah wanted to see her sister in Fort Worth. It was a 3-day ride. I told her it was too risky with the baby coming, but she insisted, said she felt fine, that I was being overprotective. So I gave in. We were 2 days from home when the labor started. Too early, too fast. By the time we got to a doctor, it was too late. That wasn't negligence, Caleb. That was tragedy. Try telling that to a judge. Caleb gathered the reins. Victor's smart. He's going after the one thing that could actually work, painting me as a danger to Noah. And with my history, he might succeed. The fear that had been lurking in Clara's chest bloomed into full panic. What do we do? We fight. Caleb's voice hardened. We get our own lawyer. We prove that Noah is safe and happy here. We show the court that Victor's only after the boy for his inheritance. How do we prove that? I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. Caleb looked back at Noah, who was happily playing with Rufus, oblivious to the storm gathering around him. We have to. That night, Clara lay awake in her room across the hall from Caleb's, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling. She was married now. Mrs. Caleb Mercer. The name felt strange on her tongue, like a coat that didn't quite fit yet. Tomorrow, Victor's lawyers would start their attack. Tomorrow, the fight for Noah would truly begin. But tonight, in this quiet house with her son safe down the hall and her husband, that word still felt surreal. Just beyond her door, Clara allowed herself to hope that maybe they'd made the right choice. A soft knock made her sit up. Yes? It's me. Caleb's voice came through the door. Can I come in? Of course. He entered, still fully dressed, and stood awkwardly by the door. Couldn't sleep either? No. I've been thinking about what Victor said, about the case he's building. Caleb ran a hand through his hair. There's something you should know, something that might matter. Clara's heart sank. What is it? When Sarah died, there were rumors that I'd been drinking, that I'd ignored her pain until it was too late. None of it was true, but people believed what they wanted to believe. He met Clara's eyes. If Victor's lawyers dig into that, if they bring witnesses who'll testify to those rumors, then we bring witnesses who'll testify to the truth, Clara said firmly. Doc Morrison delivered Sarah, didn't he? He knows what really happened. He does, but he's already our witness for this marriage. It might look like bias. Then we find others. We build our case just like Victor's building his. Clara stood and crossed to where Caleb stood. We don't give up before we've even started fighting. Caleb looked down at her, and something in his expression shifted. You're stronger than you look, Mrs. Mercer. The name sent a flutter through Clara's stomach. I've had to be, and so have you. They stood there in the lamplight, not quite touching, but closer than they'd been before. The marriage was only hours old, but already Clara could feel the threads of connection strengthening between them. Partnership, yes, but also something deeper. Recognition of kindred damage. Understanding of what it meant to lose everything and still have to keep moving forward. We'll protect him, Caleb said softly. Whatever it takes. I promise you that. I know. And Clara realized she did know. She trusted this man who'd saved her and Noah, who'd married her to give them legal protection, who looked at her son with growing affection he tried to hide. After Caleb left, Clara climbed back into bed and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere in town, Victor was probably already meeting with his lawyers. Somewhere out there, people were sharpening their judgment and preparing to tear apart the fragile family she and Caleb were trying to build. But here, in this house, they were safe. For tonight, at least, they were safe. The legal papers arrived 4 days later, delivered by a stone-faced courier who handed them to Caleb at the door and left without a word. Caleb read them at the kitchen table while Clara tried to keep her hand steady enough to knead bread dough. It's worse than I thought, Caleb said finally. How bad? Victor's claiming that Noah is in moral and physical danger, that our marriage is a sham designed to circumvent the law, that I have a history of negligence that resulted in death, that you're an unfit mother who abandoned her family and is now living off charity. Caleb's voice was tight with controlled fury. He's asking for immediate temporary custody pending a full hearing. Clara's knees went weak. Immediate? Can he do that? He can ask. Whether a judge grants it, Caleb set down the papers. We need Samuel Cooper, now. An hour later, they were back in Cooper's office. Noah left with Doc Morrison's wife, so they could speak freely. The lawyer read through Victor's petition with a deepening frown. This is aggressive, Cooper said finally, and well-crafted. Victor's lawyers know what they're doing. Can they take Noah before the hearing? Clara's voice shook. They can petition for emergency custody if they can convince a judge there's immediate danger, but that's a high bar to clear. Cooper looked at them both. The fact that you're married helps significantly. It shows stability, commitment, but Victor's attacking the marriage itself as fraudulent. It's not fraudulent, Caleb said sharply. We're legally married. I know that, but they'll argue it was done purely for legal advantage, which technically it was. They'll point to the speed of the courtship, the age difference. Age difference? Clara interrupted. I'm 26, Caleb's 34. That's hardly scandalous. In their narrative, everything becomes evidence. The point is, we need to prove this marriage is genuine, that it's based on real affection and partnership, not just legal convenience. Clara and Caleb exchanged glances. How did you prove affection that was only just beginning to form? How did you demonstrate partnership when you'd known each other barely 2 months? What do we need to do? Caleb asked. Cooper pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. First, we gather character witnesses. People who can testify to your integrity, Caleb, and to Clara's devotion as a mother. Second, we document Noah's well-being, his health, his happiness, his safety here on the ranch. Third, we investigate Victor's true motives. There's a reason he wants Noah specifically, and I'd bet money it's financial. He and Ruth can't have children, Clara said. Ruth told me they want to raise Noah as their heir. That's useful, but we need proof of ulterior motives. Financial records, letters, anything that shows this isn't about Noah's welfare, but about Victor's interests. Cooper looked at them seriously. This won't be easy. Victor has resources, influence, and a compelling narrative about a poor widow making desperate choices. We need to be smarter and more prepared. When's the hearing? Caleb asked. 3 weeks? The judge is Circuit Judge Harrison. He's fair but conservative. He'll care about propriety, stability, tradition. Cooper paused. And he knew Sarah, Caleb. He attended her funeral. The implication hung heavy in the air. A judge who remembered Sarah's death might be more inclined to believe the rumors about Caleb's negligence. Then we make sure he sees the truth, Clara said firmly. We show him who Caleb really is, who we really are. Over the next 2 weeks, Clara and Caleb worked with Samuel Cooper to build their defense. Doc Morrison agreed to testify about Sarah's death, explaining the medical complications that no amount of care could have prevented. Several of Caleb's longtime ranch hands came forward to speak to his character. The schoolteacher in town wrote a letter about Noah's improved behavior and happiness since coming to live at the ranch. But Victor was working too. Clara heard the whispers when she went to town for supplies, speculation about the hasty marriage, questions about her relationship with Caleb, thinly veiled judgment about a widow moving on so quickly. Victor's influence was everywhere, poisoning the well of public opinion. They're saying I trapped you, Clara told Caleb one evening as they reviewed their case. That I seduced you into marriage to secure my position. Caleb's jaw tightened. People will always talk, doesn't make it true. But it matters what they think. Some of these people will be at the hearing. Some of them might even testify for Victor. Then we show them something they can't deny. Caleb set down the papers he'd been reading. We show them a family, a real one. Clara looked at him questioningly. We've been keeping our distance, Caleb continued, being careful not to presume on the other's space. But if we want people to believe this marriage is real, we need to act like a married couple, in public, where people can see. He was right, Claire realized. They'd been so focused on the legal arrangement that they'd forgotten about the social performance. Married couples touched. They spoke fondly of each other. They existed in each other's orbit with a familiarity that couldn't be faked if you never practiced it. What are you suggesting? Clara asked. Come to church with me Sunday. Sit together as a family. Let me introduce you as my wife, not my housekeeper. Hold my arm when we walk. Let people see that we chose each other. It made sense. But the thought of performing affection, even pretend affection, made Clara nervous in ways she didn't want to examine. All right, she agreed. We'll try. Sunday morning, Clara dressed with extra care in the new dress Caleb had insisted on buying her, a deep green that brought out the color in her eyes. When she came downstairs, Caleb was waiting in his best suit, and the look he gave her was anything but performative. "You look beautiful," he said, and the rawness in his voice made her cheeks warm. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself." Noah bounded down the stairs, excited about going to church. "Are we a real family now, like the other families?" Caleb crouched down to Noah's level. "We've always been a real family, son. Today we're just making sure everyone else knows it too." Son. It was the first time Caleb had used the word, and Clara saw Noah's face light up like Christmas morning. At church, heads turned when they entered. Clara kept her chin up as Caleb guided her to a pew with a hand on the small of her back, a simple gesture that somehow felt monumental. They sat with Noah between them, and when Caleb reached across to take Clara's hand during the hymns, she didn't pull away. After the service, people approached with curiosity, thinly disguised as friendliness. Caleb introduced Clara as my wife, with a quiet pride that didn't seem at all forced. When Mrs. Henderson from the Mercantile made a pointed comment about whirlwind courtships, Clara felt Caleb's arm slide around her waist, pulling her close. "When you know, he said evenly. "No point waiting when you found the right person." The words were for show, Clara reminded herself. Part of the performance. But the warmth of his arm around her, the solid presence of him at her side, that felt dangerously real. They were walking back to the wagon when Victor appeared, Ruth on his arm, both dressed immaculately as always. "What a touching display," Victor said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Though I wonder if the judge will be as easily fooled as the church ladies." "There's nothing to fool," Caleb said calmly. "Clara's my wife, Noah's my son. That's the truth." "Your son?" Victor laughed. "He's James's son. My blood. You're just a convenient replacement playing house with my brother's widow." "I'm Noah's father in every way that matters," Caleb said, his voice steady despite the anger Clara could feel radiating from him. "And unlike you, I don't see him as a means to an end. I see him as a child who deserves love and stability." Victor's eyes narrowed. "We'll see what the judge sees. 3 days, Mercer. 3 days until we expose this charade for what it is." As they drove away, Clara felt sick with dread. The hearing was in 3 days. 3 days to prove their marriage was real. 3 days to convince a judge that Noah belonged with them, and not with Victor's money and influence. "We're going to lose, aren't we?" Clara whispered. Caleb's hand found hers, squeezing tight. "No, we're not. I won't let that happen." But even his certainty couldn't quite banish the fear that had taken root in Clara's heart. Because Victor was right about one thing. What they had was built on necessity, not love. And she didn't know if that would be enough to stand against the storm that was coming. That night, Clara found herself at Caleb's door again, unable to sleep, needing reassurance she couldn't name. He let her in without question, and they sat together on the edge of his bed, the bed he'd once shared with Sarah, and talked in quiet voices about everything and nothing. "Tell me about her," Clara said finally. "About Sarah." Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "She was bright, always laughing. She saw the good in everything, even when I couldn't. She wanted this ranch to be filled with children and noise and life. She sounds wonderful." "She was." Caleb's voice was rough. "And I failed her. Maybe not the way people think, but I still failed to keep her safe, to give her the life she deserved." "You loved her." "I did. Still do, in a way. You don't stop loving someone just because they're gone." Clara understood that. She still loved James, even though the sharp edge of grief had dulled to a constant ache. "Do you think—" Clara paused, choosing her words carefully. "Do you think Sarah would have wanted you to be alone forever?" Caleb looked at her, really looked at her, and Clara saw tears in his eyes he'd never let fall. "I think Sarah would have wanted me to be happy. I just don't know if I remember how." Without thinking, Clara took his hand. "Maybe we could learn together. How to be happy again. How to build something good from all this broken. Is that what you want? Caleb's thumb brushed over her knuckles. Not just for Noah's sake, but for you? Clara took a shaky breath. I think I'm starting to, yes. I didn't expect it, but being here with you, it feels like maybe there's still life ahead instead of just survival. Caleb pulled her into an embrace that felt like shelter and promise all at once. They held each other in the quiet darkness, two wounded people finding unexpected solace in this arrangement that had started as pure necessity. Whatever happens at the hearing, Caleb murmured against her hair, I want you to know that this, us, it means something to me. You mean something to me. Clara's throat was too tight for words, so she just held him tighter, and they stayed that way until the fear receded enough for sleep to find them. Clara on one side of his bed, Caleb on the other, a careful distance between them, but the knowledge that they were no longer quite so alone. The morning of the hearing arrived too soon. Clara dressed in the pre-dawn darkness, her hands shaking so badly she had to try 3 times to fasten the buttons on her best dress. Across the hall, she could hear Caleb moving around, the creak of floorboards marking his restless pacing. Neither of them had slept much. How could they, knowing that today a stranger in a black robe would decide whether Noah stayed with them or was handed over to Victor's cold ambition? She checked on Noah one more time before heading downstairs. He was still asleep, curled up with the wooden horse Caleb had carved for him last week. Doc Morrison's wife would watch him during the hearing. They'd agreed it was better than having him sit through hours of testimony about his future. Clara bent and kissed his forehead, breathing in the little boy sweetness of him, and prayed silently to whatever forces governed the universe that this wouldn't be one of the last mornings she woke him in this house. Caleb was in the kitchen, staring at a cup of coffee he clearly hadn't touched. He looked up when Clara entered, and the vulnerability in his eyes, the fear he was trying so hard to hide, made her cross to him without thinking. We're going to be all right, she said, though she wasn't sure which of them she was trying to convince. You don't know that. No, but I know we've done everything we can. We've told the truth. We've built a real home here. That has to count for something. Caleb pulled her into his arms, and Clara let herself lean into his strength. Over the past 3 weeks, this had become familiar, seeking comfort in each other when the weight of what they were facing grew too heavy. What had started as a practical arrangement was transforming into something neither of them had names for yet, something that felt dangerously like hope. Whatever happens, Caleb said into her hair, I want you to know you gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever. You and Noah both. You made this house feel like home again. Clara's eyes stung with unshed tears. Don't talk like we've already lost. We haven't even started fighting yet. The courthouse in Mercer's Bend was packed when they arrived. Word had spread about the custody case, and it seemed like half the county had turned out to watch the spectacle. Clara felt the weight of their stares as Caleb helped her down from the wagon, his hand steady on her elbow. Head up, he murmured. Show them you're not ashamed of anything we've done. Inside, the courtroom was stuffy despite the cool November air outside. Victor and Ruth sat at one table with 2 expensive lawyers from Dallas, all polished and confident. Samuel Cooper waited at the other table, looking determined but clearly outmatched in sheer firepower. Judge Harrison entered, a stern man in his 60s with iron-gray hair and eyes that gave away nothing. Clara's stomach dropped when she saw him glance at Caleb with what might have been recognition. He had known Sarah. He remembered. This court is now in session, the judge announced. We're here to consider the petition of Victor Holloway for custody of the minor child Noah James Holloway, currently in the care of his mother, Clara Mercer, and her husband, Caleb Mercer. Mr. Thornton, you may present your case. Victor's lead lawyer stood, a sharp-faced man who looked like he'd never lost a case in his life. Thank you, Your Honor. The facts of this case are straightforward and deeply troubling. 4-year-old Noah Holloway has been placed in a situation of moral and physical danger by his mother's reckless decisions. Clara's hands clenched in her lap. Caleb reached over and took one, holding firm. Mrs. Clara Holloway, recently widowed and destitute, made the ill-advised choice to travel across dangerous territory with a sick child rather than accept help from her late husband's family. This poor judgment nearly cost both their lives. They were found collapsed and near death on Mr. Mercer's property. Subsequently, Rather than seeking proper assistance, Mrs. Holloway entered into a hasty and questionable arrangement with Mr. Mercer, a man with a troubled history of his own. Thornton paused for effect, letting his words sink in. Mr. Caleb Mercer, while perhaps well-intentioned, has a documented history of negligence that resulted in the death of his first wife and unborn child. 3 years ago, Sarah Mercer died in childbirth after her husband insisted on taking her on a long journey despite her delicate condition. The entire community of Mercer's Bend can attest to the tragedy and to Mr. Mercer's role in it. "That's a lie!" Clara started to stand, but Caleb's hand pulled her back down. "Let him finish," Caleb said quietly, though his face had gone white. "We'll get our turn." Thornton continued as if there'd been no interruption. When faced with the natural consequences of her poor choices, homelessness, poverty, social censure, Mrs. Holloway entered into a marriage of convenience with Mr. Mercer. A marriage conducted with unseemly haste just weeks after they met, with no courtship or proper engagement. This arrangement, while technically legal, was clearly designed to circumvent my client's legitimate concerns about his nephew's welfare. The lawyer pulled out a document. "Your Honor, we have statements from multiple townspeople attesting to the rushed nature of this marriage, to Mrs. Holloway's destitute state before it, and to Mr. Mercer's history of isolation and neglect. We also have medical testimony regarding the circumstances of Sarah Mercer's death that calls into serious question Mr. Mercer's fitness as a guardian. My client, Mr. Victor Holloway, is the boy's paternal uncle. He and his wife are respectable members of Dallas society, financially secure, and able to provide Noah with every advantage: education, stability, and the family name he deserves. They can offer what Mrs. Holloway and Mr. Mercer cannot: a proper home, free from the taint of scandal and the shadow of past tragedies." Thornton sat down with the satisfied air of a man who just delivered a killing blow. Clara felt sick. When presented like that, her choices did sound reckless. Her marriage to Caleb did seem suspicious. And the stuff about Sarah, she could see how the judge might wonder if history would repeat itself. Samuel Cooper stood, and Clara held her breath. "Your Honor, Mr. Thornton has painted a dramatic picture, but it's built on half-truths and deliberate mischaracterizations. Let's examine the actual facts, shall we?" Cooper's voice was calm and measured, a stark contrast to Thornton's theatrical delivery. "Clara Holloway became a widow 8 months ago when her husband James died in a mining accident. James's family, including Victor Holloway, refused to provide any assistance whatsoever. Mrs. Holloway attempted to make her own way, but found herself without resources in an economy that offers few opportunities for widows with young children. She made the difficult but brave decision to seek help from her sister in Colorado. Yes, the journey was hard. Yes, it nearly ended in tragedy. But that tragedy was averted when Caleb Mercer saved both Clara and Noah's lives." Cooper pulled out his own documents. Mr. Mercer provided medical care, shelter, and eventually employment to Mrs. Holloway. Over the course of 2 months, a genuine affection developed between them. Their marriage was not hasty. It was the natural result of two people who found in each other exactly what they needed to heal from their respective losses. The lawyer's tone sharpened. "As for Mr. Mercer's troubled history, we will present medical testimony from Dr. Morrison, who attended Sarah Mercer during her final hours. He will explain that Mrs. Mercer died of complications no amount of care could have prevented. The journey Mr. Thornton mentioned? It was Sarah's idea, undertaken against her husband's advice. The tragedy was just that, a tragedy, not negligence." Clara watched the judge's face, trying to read his expression. Was he listening? Did he believe them? "Furthermore," Cooper continued, "we will demonstrate that Noah Holloway is thriving in the Mercer household. He's healthy, happy, and well cared for. In contrast, we will show that Victor Holloway's sudden interest in his nephew has nothing to do with the boy's welfare and everything to do with securing an heir for his estate. Mr. Holloway showed no concern for Noah when the child and his mother were destitute. He only appeared after they'd found stability, and only with demands and threats." Cooper sat down, and Judge Harrison leaned back in his chair, studying both tables. "This court will hear testimony from both sides. Mr. Thornton, call your first witness." The next hours were brutal. Thornton called a parade of witnesses who painted Clara as desperate and Caleb as dangerous. Mrs. Henderson from the Mercantile testified about how thin and ragged Clara had looked when she first came to town. The woman made it sound like evidence of unfitness rather than poverty. A ranch hand who'd worked for Caleb years ago described how withdrawn and isolated he'd become after Sarah's death, implying instability rather than grief. Then came the medical examiner who'd signed Sarah's death certificate. Under Thornton's careful questioning, the man admitted that the complications Sarah suffered could sometimes be worsened by stress and physical exertion, like the stress of a 3-day wagon journey. He wouldn't go so far as to blame Caleb directly, but the implication hung in the air. And in your professional opinion, doctor, could this tragedy have been avoided if Mrs. Mercer had remained at home under careful supervision? It's impossible to say with certainty, but yes, her chances would likely have been better. Clara felt Caleb flinch beside her. She squeezed his hand hard, willing him to remember that this was Victor's version of events, not the truth. When it was Cooper's turn, he called Doc Morrison first. The old doctor took the stand with the solid authority of someone who'd delivered half the babies in the county and treated the other half for various ailments over his 40-year career. Doctor Morrison, you attended Sarah Mercer during her final labor, correct? I did. Can you explain what happened? Sarah had what we call placental abruption. The placenta separated from the uterine wall prematurely. It's a catastrophic complication that causes massive bleeding. There's nothing that can be done except deliver the baby immediately and hope you can control the hemorrhage. In Sarah's case, we couldn't. Could this complication have been predicted or prevented? No, it happens without warning, and there's no way to prevent it. It doesn't matter if a woman is resting in bed or traveling in a wagon. When it happens, it happens. So the journey Caleb and Sarah Mercer were on had no bearing on the outcome. None whatsoever. I explained this to the family at the time. Sarah's death was a tragedy, but it was not anyone's fault. Cooper let that sink in before continuing. You've also examined young Noah Holloway recently, correct? I have. Multiple times since he came to live with the Mercers. And what is your professional assessment of his health and well-being? Doc Morrison's face softened. That boy has flourished. When I first saw him, he was underweight, sick, and traumatized from weeks of hardship. Now he's healthy, happy, and well-adjusted. Whatever the Mercers are doing, it's working. Thornton tried to undermine Morrison on cross-examination, implying bias because of his friendship with Caleb, but the doctor held firm. Facts were facts, and Noah was thriving. Next came the school teacher, Miss Peters, who testified about Noah's progress. Then several of Caleb's ranch hands who spoke to his character and his kindness toward the boy. Each piece of testimony chipped away at Victor's narrative, but Clara couldn't tell if it was enough. Finally, Cooper called Clara herself to the stand. The walk to the witness chair felt like a mile. Clara was acutely aware of every eye in the courtroom on her, judging, assessing, deciding if she was fit to keep her own son. She sat down, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Cooper started gently. Mrs. Mercer, can you tell the court about the circumstances that brought you to Caleb Mercer's ranch? Clara took a breath and told her story. The mining accident that killed James, Victor's refusal to help, the eviction, the desperate journey, Noah's illness. She didn't cry, wouldn't give Victor the satisfaction, but her voice shook when she described carrying her feverish son across the plains, not knowing if they'd survive another day. When Caleb found us, we were dying. He saved our lives. He didn't have to. We were strangers, and he owed us nothing, but he saved us anyway. What was your arrangement with Mr. Mercer initially? He offered me employment, room and board in exchange for housekeeping and cooking. It was honest work, and I was grateful for it. When did that arrangement change? When Victor appeared and made it clear he intended to take Noah from me, my lawyer advised that marriage would provide legal protection. I discussed it with Caleb, and he agreed. So the marriage was motivated by legal concerns. Clara looked directly at the judge. It started that way, yes, but it became something more. Caleb is a good man who'd been hurt badly. I was a woman who'd lost everything. We found in each other something we both desperately needed, not just legal protection or household help, but companionship, understanding, a reason to keep going. Do you love your husband, Mrs. Mercer? The question hung in the air. Clara's eyes found Caleb's across the courtroom. She saw the hope and fear warring in his expression. She thought about the quiet evenings on the porch, the gentle way he treated Noah, the night she'd fallen asleep to the sound of his footsteps in the hall, and felt comforted rather than afraid. "Yes," she said, and realized as the word left her mouth that it was true. "I do." Thornton's cross-examination was vicious. He hammered at the timeline of the marriage, at the conveniences it provided, at how desperate she'd been. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Mercer, that you married Mr. Mercer purely to avoid losing custody of Noah?" "I married Caleb because he's a good man who treats my son with kindness and respect, because he gave us a home when no one else would, and because I was falling in love with him whether I wanted to or not." How convenient that this love appeared exactly when you needed legal protection. Love isn't convenient, Mr. Thornton. It's terrifying and complicated, and it doesn't follow a schedule. But it's real. When Clara stepped down, her legs were shaking. Caleb's eyes followed her back to their table, and she saw something in them that made her heart skip. Belief, maybe. Hope that what she'd said was true. Then Cooper called Caleb to the stand. If Clara's testimony had been difficult, Caleb's was agony. He sat rigid in the witness chair, his face carefully blank, as Cooper led him through his history, the death of his wife and child, the isolation that followed, the choice to help Clara and Noah. "Why did you help them, Mr. Mercer? You could have taken them to town and been done with it." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion he wasn't quite hiding. "Because I saw myself in them. People who'd lost everything and were still fighting to survive. I couldn't turn away from that. And when I got to know them, got to know Clara and Noah, I realized my house had been a tomb for 3 years. They brought it back to life." "Do you love Clara?" Another pause. Clara held her breath. "Yes. I didn't expect to. Didn't think I had it in me anymore after Sarah. But Clara is strong and brave and fiercely protective of her son. She made me remember what it felt like to care about someone, to want to be better than I'd been." "And Noah?" Caleb's expression finally cracked, showing the depth of feeling underneath. "That boy is my son, in every way that matters. I know I'm not his blood father. I know James was a good man and I'm not trying to replace him. But I love that kid like he's mine. I'd die before I let anyone hurt him." Thornton went for the throat on cross-examination. "Isn't it true, Mr. Mercer, that you took Sarah on a journey against medical advice?" "No, Sarah insisted on going. I tried to talk her out of it." "But you gave in." "She was my wife, not my prisoner. She made her own choices." "Choices that killed her." "Objection." Cooper was on his feet. Argumentative and inflammatory. "Sustained," Judge Harrison said. "Mr. Thornton, stick to questions." But the damage was done. Thornton had planted the seed that Caleb couldn't protect the people he loved, that he'd let Sarah die and might let something happen to Noah too. The lawyer shifted tactics. "Mr. Mercer, isn't it true that you've been isolated for 3 years? That you've avoided the town, avoided people, lived like a hermit?" "I was grieving." "Or were you hiding? Hiding from the judgment of people who knew what you'd done?" "I wasn't hiding. I was surviving. By burying yourself in work and solitude, by cutting yourself off from human connection, that's not healthy, Mr. Mercer. That's not the behavior of a man fit to raise a child." Caleb's hands clenched on the arms of the witness chair. "I was broken. My wife and child died. I needed time to heal. Clara and Noah helped me do that. They gave me a reason to engage with life again. If that's a crime, then convict me." When Caleb stepped down, his face was pale but composed. Clara wanted to run to him, to tell him he'd done well, but they had to maintain decorum. She settled for meeting his eyes and trying to communicate everything she felt in that glance. The final witness was Victor himself, and Thornton made sure to present him as the perfect guardian. Wealthy, respectable, educated, a man who only wanted what was best for his late brother's son. "Mr. Holloway, why are you seeking custody of Noah?" "Because he's family. Because James was my brother, and I owe it to his memory to ensure his son has every advantage in life. Noah deserves the Holloway name, the Holloway legacy. He deserves better than growing up on a failing ranch with a stepfather who can barely keep himself together. Clara's blood boiled at the casual dismissal of everything she and Caleb had built. When Cooper cross-examined, he finally got to the heart of the matter. "Mr. Holloway, you and your wife are unable to have children, correct?" Victor's face tightened. "That's a private matter. It becomes relevant when you're asking to take someone else's child. You want Noah as an heir, don't you? Someone to inherit the Holloway estate?" "I want Noah to have opportunities Clara can't provide." "That's not what I asked. You want Noah because you need an heir, and he's the closest thing to a biological son you'll ever have. Isn't that the truth?" "I want Noah because he's family." Where was this family loyalty 8 months ago when Clara came to you begging for help? Where was it when she and Noah were homeless and starving? You turned her away, Mr. Holloway. You laughed at her suffering. And now you want the court to believe you suddenly care about Noah's welfare. I made a mistake. I'm trying to correct it. Or you're trying to acquire an heir without the inconvenience of adoption proceedings. You want James's son because he carries Holloway blood, and that makes him valuable to you. Admit it." "Objection." Thornton was on his feet, badgering the witness. But the truth was out there now, hanging in the air for everyone to see. Judge Harrison called for a recess before closing arguments. Clara and Caleb stood outside the courthouse, not quite touching, but standing close enough that their shoulders brushed. "I meant what I said in there," Caleb said quietly, "about loving you, about Noah being my son. I know we started this for practical reasons, but somewhere along the way it became real for me." Clara turned to face him fully. "It became real for me too. I love you, Caleb Mercer, not because I need you, though I do, but because you're kind and strong, and you make me believe in second chances." Caleb pulled her into his arms right there on the courthouse steps, and Clara didn't care who saw them. Let the whole town witness that this marriage was real, that what they'd built together was worth fighting for. When they returned to the courtroom, both lawyers delivered their closing arguments. Thornton painted Victor as a savior, and Clara as a desperate woman who'd made terrible choices. Cooper painted Clara and Caleb as two people who'd saved each other and built a loving home for a child who desperately needed one. Then it was in Judge Harrison's hands. "This court will take a brief recess to consider the evidence," the judge said. "We'll reconvene in 1 hour for my decision." That hour was the longest of Clara's life. She and Caleb sat in the courthouse hallway, holding hands, not speaking. What was there to say? They'd told the truth. They'd laid bare their hearts and their history. Now they could only wait and hope it was enough. When the bailiff called them back in, Clara's legs barely held her. Caleb's hand in hers was the only thing keeping her grounded. Judge Harrison looked out over the packed courtroom, his expression grave. "This has been one of the most difficult cases I've ever presided over. Both sides have presented compelling arguments about what's best for young Noah Holloway. After careful consideration of all the testimony and evidence, I've reached my decision." Clara couldn't breathe. Beside her, Caleb had gone perfectly still. It's clear to this court that Victor Holloway's petition, while dressed in concerns about the child's welfare, is primarily motivated by his desire for an heir. His abandonment of Clara Holloway in her time of need, followed by his sudden interest once she'd found stability, speaks to opportunism rather than genuine care. Hope flared in Clara's chest, but she didn't dare believe it yet. "However," the judge continued, and that one word made Clara's heart sink, "I'm also troubled by certain aspects of the Mercers' situation. The rushed marriage, while legal, does raise questions about motive. And while Dr. Morrison's testimony regarding Sarah Mercer's death was convincing, I remain concerned about Mr. Mercer's extended isolation and whether he's truly equipped to be a father figure." "No, no, please no. That said," Judge Harrison's voice softened slightly, "I have watched Noah Holloway in this courtroom today. I've seen how he looks at his mother and at Caleb Mercer. I've heard testimony from medical professionals and teachers about his health and happiness. And I cannot ignore the fundamental truth that a child belongs with his mother unless there is clear evidence of unfitness or danger." Clara's vision was blurring with tears she refused to let fall. Mrs. Clara Mercer loves her son. That much is beyond dispute. Mr. Caleb Mercer, despite his troubled past, has demonstrated genuine care for the boy. They have provided Noah with a stable home, and all evidence suggests the child is thriving in their care. The judge looked directly at Victor, his expression hardening. In contrast, Mr. Victor Holloway has failed to demonstrate that Noah would be better served in his custody. His motives are suspect, his timing is convenient, and his abandonment of his nephew in a time of crisis speaks poorly of his character. Therefore, this court denies Victor Holloway's petition for custody. Noah James Holloway shall remain in the care of his mother, Clara Mercer, and her husband, Caleb Mercer. Furthermore, I am granting the Mercers full legal custody and terminating any future claims Mr. Holloway might attempt to bring. This decision is final. The gavel came down, and for a moment Clara couldn't process what had happened. Then Caleb's arms were around her, and she was crying into his chest, while he held her so tight she could barely breathe. They'd won. Noah was theirs, safe, protected, forever. Behind them, Clara heard Victor's outraged protests and Thornton's attempts to argue for appeal, but Judge Harrison shut them down firmly. Mr. Holloway, you had your chance to help this child and his mother. You chose cruelty over compassion. This court will not reward that behavior. If you attempt to pursue this matter further, I will view it as harassment and act accordingly. Clara pulled back just enough to see Caleb's face. He was crying too, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks, his expression a mixture of relief and joy and disbelief. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it." "You did it," Caleb said. "You fought for him. You were so brave." "We fought for him. Together." They held each other while the courtroom emptied around them, while Victor and Ruth left in furious silence, while Cooper packed up his documents with a satisfied smile. They held each other because they could finally breathe, finally believe that the family they'd built against all odds was real and permanent and theirs. Outside, the November sun was shining, and when they picked up Noah from Doc Morrison's house, the boy threw himself into their arms with such force he nearly knocked them both over. "Can we go home now?" Noah asked. "Yes, sweetheart," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. "We can go home." And as they drove back to the ranch, their home, Clara looked at the man beside her and the boy between them and felt, for the first time since James died, that everything might actually be okay. More than okay. They'd been given a second chance at family, at happiness, at life. And they weren't going to waste it. The ride home felt different than any journey Clara had made before. The same rutted road, the same brown plains stretching to the horizon, but everything had changed. Noah chattered excitedly between them, oblivious to the weight that had lifted from his mother's shoulders, while Caleb drove with one hand on the reins and the other resting on Clara's knee, a simple touch that said everything words couldn't. "Papa Caleb," Noah said suddenly, testing out the name he'd been too shy to use before. "Can I help you with the horses tomorrow?" Caleb's hand tightened on Clara's knee, and she saw his throat work before he answered. "Of course, son. I was hoping you'd ask." Son, Papa. The words that had seemed so impossible just months ago now felt as natural as breathing. When the ranch came into view, Clara felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't just shelter anymore, wasn't just a job or an arrangement. This was home. These fences, this house, this land, it all belonged to them now. Not in a legal sense, perhaps, but in every way that mattered. Rufus came bounding out to meet them, barking joyfully, as if he understood they'd won something important. Noah jumped down from the wagon and ran to the dog, laughing as Rufus nearly knocked him over with enthusiastic licks. Caleb helped Clara down, but instead of releasing her, he pulled her close. "We should celebrate," he said quietly. "This is worth celebrating." "What did you have in mind?" "I was thinking—" He paused, suddenly looking uncertain in a way that was endearing rather than concerning. "There's something I want to show you, something I've been meaning to do for a while now." Clara's curiosity was piqued, but before she could ask, Caleb was already heading toward the barn. "Noah, you stay with your mama for a bit. I'll be right back." He disappeared inside while Clara and Noah stood in the yard, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. Noah tugged on her hand. "Mama, are we really safe now? Uncle Victor can't take me away?" Clara knelt down to his level, cupping his small face in her hands. We're really safe, sweetheart. The judge said you belong with me and Caleb. Nobody can change that. Good. Noah threw his arms around her neck. I like it here. I like having Papa Caleb and Rufus and my room and everything. Me too, baby. Me too. When Caleb emerged from the barn, he was carrying something wrapped in canvas. He set it down carefully in the yard and looked at Clara with an expression she'd never seen before, nervous and hopeful and achingly vulnerable. I made this, he said. Started it about a month ago. Wasn't sure I'd ever have the courage to show you, but after today, well, today feels like the right time. He unwrapped the canvas and Clara gasped. It was a sign, carved from beautiful dark wood and sanded smooth. The letters were precise and elegant, clearly the work of someone who'd spent hours getting every detail perfect. It read, "The Mercer family, Caleb, Clara, and Noah." I thought we could hang it by the front gate, Caleb said, his voice rough. So everyone who passes knows this is our home, our family. Clara couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She reached out to trace the letters of her name, nestled between Caleb's and Noah's, and felt tears spill down her cheeks. It's perfect, she whispered. It's absolutely perfect. Noah ran to examine the sign, sounding out the letters he'd been learning at school. That's our name. We're the Mercers. Caleb lifted the boy onto his shoulders, something he'd started doing in recent weeks that never failed to make Noah squeal with delight. That's right, son. We're the Mercers, and this is our home. They spent the rest of the afternoon putting up the sign, with Noah helping by handing them nails and offering a running commentary on how good it looked. When it was finally secured to the gatepost, they stood back to admire it. There, Caleb said with satisfaction. Now it's official. That evening, Clara made a special dinner, roast chicken with all the fixings she'd been saving for an occasion worthy of celebration. They ate at the kitchen table that had become the heart of their home, Noah regaling them with stories from school and plans for the tree fort Caleb had promised to help him build. After Noah was in bed, Clara and Caleb found themselves on the porch again, as had become their ritual. But tonight felt different. The weight of uncertainty that had hung over them for weeks was finally gone, leaving space for something new to grow. I keep waiting to wake up, Clara said softly, to find out this was all a dream and I'm still wandering the plains with Noah dying in my arms. It's real. Caleb took her hand, lacing their fingers together. You're here, Noah's safe. We won. We did, didn't we? Clara laughed, the sound bubbling up from a well of relief so deep she'd almost forgotten what joy felt like. We actually won. Caleb turned to face her fully, and in the lamplight from the kitchen, Clara could see every line and shadow of his face, the grief that had carved valleys in his cheeks, the hope that was slowly filling them in again. Clara, I need to tell you something, and I need you to know I mean it, not because of the court case or Noah, or any of the practical reasons that brought us together. Her heart started beating faster. All right. When Sarah died, I thought that was it for me. Thought I'd used up my chance at family, at happiness, at any kind of life worth living. I was just going through the motions, waiting for my time to run out. He paused, his thumb stroking over her knuckles. Then you showed up, you and Noah. And you didn't just save yourselves when you collapsed in my field. You saved me too. Caleb, let me finish, please. He took a shaky breath. I love you, Clara. Not the way I loved Sarah. That was a young man's love, bright and uncomplicated. I love you the way a man who's lost everything loves the person who helps him find himself again. Deep and steady and forever. Clara's vision blurred with tears. I love you too. I think I started falling that first night when you brought us inside, even though I was too scared to admit it. You were so gruff and careful and kind underneath it all. I wasn't kind. I was terrified. Terrified of caring again, of losing again. But you did it anyway. You let us in anyway. Caleb cupped her face in his rough, calloused hands. Can I kiss you? A real kiss? Not the one I gave you at the wedding? Instead of answering, Clara closed the distance between them and pressed her lips to his. It was sweet and tentative at first, both of them learning the shape of this new intimacy. Then Caleb's arms came around her, pulling her close, and Clara melted into him with a sigh that carried months of longing and relief. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "Move into my room," he said. "Not because you have to, not because anyone's watching, but because I want to fall asleep beside you and wake up with you every morning. Because I want this marriage to be real in every way." Clara's heart was so full she thought it might burst. Yes, I want that too." They stayed on the porch until the stars came out, talking and kissing and making plans for a future that finally felt possible. When they went inside, Caleb carried Clara up the stairs to the room that had been his alone for so long, and they spent the night learning each other's bodies with the tenderness of people who knew how precious second chances were. The next morning, Clara woke wrapped in Caleb's arms. Sunlight streaming through windows, she'd have to get curtains for now that this was her room too. Our room, she corrected herself. Everything was ours now. Caleb was already awake, watching her with an expression of such contentment that Clara had to kiss him just because she could. "Morning," he murmured against her lips. "Good morning." Clara stretched, luxuriating in the warmth of the bed and the man beside her. "I should get up. Noah will be awake soon and breakfast won't make itself." 5 more minutes. Caleb pulled her closer. "I've waited 3 years to wake up like this. Give me 5 more minutes." Clara laughed and settled back against him. 5 more minutes. They actually made it 7 before Noah's voice came from downstairs, calling for his mama. Real life, with all its demands and joys, was waiting. The weeks that followed the court victory fell into a rhythm that felt both new and timeless. Clara moved her belongings into Caleb's room, their room, and found that sharing space with him was easier than she'd expected. He was tidy and considerate, always making room for her things, always asking what she preferred rather than assuming. Noah adjusted to the change with the easy resilience of childhood. He started calling Caleb Papa without prompting, and the transformation in both man and boy was remarkable to witness. Caleb taught Noah how to rope fence posts, how to read the weather and the clouds, how to gentle a skittish horse with patience and soft words. In return, Noah gave Caleb back his laughter, his purpose, his connection to the joy of watching a child grow. Winter settled over the ranch in earnest, bringing cold winds and occasional snow. Clara spent her days making the house truly theirs, sewing curtains for their bedroom, organizing the kitchen to her liking, even tackling the spare rooms upstairs that had been closed off for years. Each small change felt like putting down roots, like claiming this space as home. One evening in early December, as they sat by the fire after Noah had gone to bed, Caleb broached a subject that had clearly been on his mind. "I've been thinking," he said, setting down the harness he'd been mending, "about expanding the ranch. Maybe hiring another hand or two, getting more cattle, building it into something substantial to pass on to Noah someday." Clara looked up from the shirt she was patching. "That sounds wonderful. But why now?" "Because I have a reason to build for the future again. Because I want Noah to inherit something worth having. And because—" He paused, looking almost shy. "Because I'm hoping maybe Noah won't be our only child." Clara's hands stilled on the fabric. "You want more children?" "Only if you do. I know it's asking a lot, after everything you've been through, but I keep thinking about what Sarah wanted, a house full of kids and noise and life. I couldn't give that to her, but maybe we could build that together?" The hope in his voice was almost painful to hear. Clara set aside her mending and moved to sit beside him on the sofa. "I would love that," she said softly. "I always wanted more children, but James and we only had Noah before he died. I thought that ship had sailed." "So you're saying yes?" "I'm saying yes." Clara took his hand. "Let's fill this house with the family it was meant to hold." Caleb pulled her into his arms, and Clara felt the last pieces of her broken heart slot into place. This was what healing looked like, not forgetting the past, but building something new alongside it. Christmas came with the blanket of fresh snow that delighted Noah and gave the ranch a picture book beauty. Clara had been worried about their first holiday together, unsure how to honor the memories of those they'd lost while celebrating what they'd found. But Caleb surprised her. On Christmas Eve, he brought down a box from the attic, Sarah's Christmas decorations, carefully preserved for 3 years. "I thought we could use these," he said quietly, "if you're comfortable with it." Sarah loved Christmas. She'd want these things to bring joy again, not just sit in a box gathering dust. Clara felt tears prick her eyes at the generosity of the gesture. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Sarah's gone, but that doesn't mean everything of hers has to be locked away. And I thought, maybe you could add some of James's things too, if you have anything. Make it a celebration of where we've both come from, as well as where we're going." So they decorated together, hanging Sarah's delicate glass ornaments alongside the wooden soldiers James had carved for Noah, creating a tree that honored both their pasts while celebrating their present. Noah danced around them, chattering about Christmas morning and whether it might snow more. That night, after Noah was finally asleep, Clara and Caleb sat by the tree in the darkened parlor, the lights twinkling like captured stars. "Thank you," Clara said, "for including James in this. Some men wouldn't be so generous." "James was Noah's father. He'll always be part of our family, even if he's not here." Caleb pulled her close. "Besides, I like to think he'd approve of us, of how we're taking care of his son." "I think he would too. James was practical above all else. He'd want Noah safe and loved, and that's what we're giving him." "What about you?" Caleb asked. "Are you safe and loved?" Clara turned to look at him, this man who'd saved her life, and then slowly, carefully, stolen her heart. "I've never felt safer, or more loved." "Good." Caleb kissed her forehead. "Because I plan on spending the rest of my life making sure you feel that way." Christmas morning was chaos in the best possible way. Noah woke them before dawn, bouncing on their bed with excitement until Caleb groaned dramatically and Clara laughed. They stumbled downstairs to find that Caleb had secretly prepared gifts: a new doll for Clara that he'd carved himself, a wooden train set for Noah that must have taken weeks to build, and for all of them, a new family Bible where he'd written their names on the family tree page: Caleb James Mercer, Clara Ann Mercer, and Noah James Mercer. "So we're all official," he explained, "all written down as a family." Clara cried, of course, but they were happy tears, the kind that came from having more joy than one heart could comfortably hold. January brought news that made Clara's joy complete. She was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks but hadn't been certain until Doc Morrison confirmed it. When she told Caleb, he picked her up and spun her around despite her laughing protests, then immediately set her down and fussed over whether spinning was safe for the baby. "I'm fine," Clara assured him, still laughing. "Women have been having babies since the dawn of time. I'm not made of glass." But Caleb was adamant about taking care of her, remembering all too well what he'd lost before. Clara had to gently remind him that she wasn't Sarah, that every pregnancy was different, that fear couldn't be allowed to steal their joy. "I know," Caleb said, his hand protective on her still flat stomach. "I know you're not Sarah, but I also know I couldn't survive losing you, so humor me, all right? Let me worry a little. A little worry I can handle. But Caleb, I need you to trust that we're going to be fine, that this baby is going to be fine. Can you do that?" He took a shaky breath. "I can try." Noah was thrilled about the prospect of a sibling, already making plans for all the things he'd teach the baby. He talked to Clara's stomach every night before bed, telling his future brother or sister about the ranch and Rufus and all the adventures they'd have together. Watching him, Clara felt a profound gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. Yes, it had been born of desperation and necessity. Yes, it had started with a transaction rather than romance. But what they'd built was real and deep and more precious than anything she could have imagined that day she'd collapsed at the edge of Caleb's land. As winter gave way to spring, the ranch came alive with new growth. Caleb hired 2 ranch hands and expanded the herd just as he'd planned. Clara planted a kitchen garden and started teaching Noah his letters in the evenings. The house rang with laughter and conversation, with the sounds of a family learning how to be whole again. In April, a letter arrived from Colorado. Clara's sister Helen had finally gotten word about where Clara was and wrote with questions and concern. Clara wrote back with the whole story: James's death, Victor's cruelty, the desperate journey, Caleb's rescue, the marriage, the court battle, and finally, the happiness they'd found together. Helen's response came quickly, filled with relief and joy and a promise to visit in the summer to meet this man who'd saved her sister and nephew. She wants to make sure you're treating me right, Clara told Caleb with a smile. She's very protective. Good. You should have people who protect you. Caleb pulled her onto his lap, careful of her growing belly. But I'll do my best to convince her I'm worthy of you. You're more than worthy. You're everything. The baby came in late August, on a morning when the heat lay heavy over the land and the cicadas sang in the dry grass. Caleb paced outside while Doc Morrison attended Clara, looking so pale and terrified that the doctor finally took pity on him. "Come in," Morrison called. "Meet your daughter." Caleb stumbled into the room where Clara lay exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Caleb, meet Sarah Clara Mercer. I hope you don't mind. I wanted to honor your first wife. She would have wanted this house filled with children." Caleb's face crumpled as he took the baby in shaking hands. The infant was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and Clara's delicate features. She opened her eyes, gray-blue like her father's, and seemed to study him with an intensity that made him laugh through his tears. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "She's absolutely perfect." Noah bounded into the room, having waited downstairs with growing impatience. "Can I see? Can I hold her?" Caleb carefully settled into the chair beside Clara's bed and helped Noah hold his new sister, one strong arm supporting them both. Clara watched her family, her husband, her son, her daughter, and felt a peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. "We did it," she said softly. "We actually built this. A real family." Caleb looked at her over the children's heads, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Best thing I ever did was find you in that field. Best thing I ever did was collapse there." They laughed at that, at the absurdity of how they'd started and the beauty of where they'd ended up. Little Sarah proved to be an easy baby, much to everyone's relief. She nursed well, slept reasonably, and seemed content to be passed around between her parents and brother. Noah took his big brother duties seriously, always running to tell Clara when Sarah cried and insisting on helping with everything from diaper changes to bath time. Helen visited in September and was immediately charmed by Caleb despite her initial skepticism. "I'll admit, I had my doubts when you wrote about marrying a stranger," she told Clara privately. "But seeing you together, seeing how he looks at you and the children, Clara, you found something rare." "I know," Clara said, watching Caleb show Noah how to properly hold Sarah while they sat on the porch. "I never expected to be this happy again. Never thought it was possible." Life has a funny way of surprising us, doesn't it? That winter, as the ranch settled into the quiet of the cold months, Clara and Caleb found themselves on the porch again one evening after the children were in bed. It had been over a year since the court hearing, over a year since they'd won the right to be a family. "What are you thinking about?" Clara asked, noticing Caleb's contemplative expression. "Just everything. How much has changed. How different my life looks now compared to 3 years ago." He pulled her closer. "I was dead inside, Clara, just going through the motions. And then you and Noah showed up and forced me back to life. We didn't force you to do anything. You chose to help us. You chose to care. Maybe. But you made it impossible not to care. You were so fierce and brave and determined to protect your son. How could I not love that?" Clara rested her head on his shoulder, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Do you think Sarah would approve? Of us, I mean. Of what we've built here?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "I think Sarah would be happy that I'm happy, that this house is filled with the family she always wanted it to hold. She was generous like that. She'd want me to move forward, not stay frozen in grief. James would feel the same way. He loved Noah so much. He'd be glad to know our son has a father who loves him just as fiercely." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd lost everything and somehow found each other in the wreckage. The house behind them held their sleeping children, the product of both past loves and present devotion. The land around them was theirs to shape and build on, a legacy for the family they were creating together. "Clara? Thank you." She lifted her head to look at him. "For what?" "For being brave enough to keep walking when anyone else would have given up. For trusting me enough to stay. For loving me even when I wasn't sure I deserved it." He cupped her face in his hands. "For giving me back my life." You gave me mine too, Clara whispered. We saved each other. Yeah, Caleb agreed, kissing her softly. I guess we did. Inside the house, baby Sarah started to fuss, and they could hear Noah's little footsteps as he went to check on his sister the way he did every night. Clara smiled at the sound of her son trying to soothe the baby with made-up songs and reassurances that Mama would be right there. I should go, Clara said, but she didn't move immediately. In a minute. Caleb held her a moment longer. Just let me hold you for one more minute. So Clara stayed, wrapped in her husband's arms under the vast Texas sky, listening to her children's voices drift from the house that had become their haven. She thought about the desperate woman who'd collapsed at the edge of this land, half dead and terrified, certain that all hope was lost. That woman couldn't have imagined this. The love, the security, the bone-deep happiness of being exactly where she was meant to be. Life had asked her to make impossible choices, to keep walking when her body wanted to quit, to trust a stranger with her son's future, to marry without love and hope that love might follow. The road had been hard and uncertain, paved with grief and fear and the constant threat of loss, but she'd walked it anyway, and it had led her here, to this ranch with its new sign proclaiming their family name, to this man who held her like she was precious and irreplaceable, to these children, one born of her body and another of her heart, both wholly and completely loved. To this life that had been built not on romance or fairy tales, but on the gritty, beautiful reality of two broken people choosing each other every single day. Clara Mercer closed her eyes and breathed in the cool night air, the scent of earth and grass and home. Behind her, the house glowed with lamplight and the sounds of family. Beside her, Caleb's steady heartbeat reminded her that she was safe, that she was loved, that she'd found her place in this vast and sometimes cruel world. It hadn't been the journey she'd planned, but it had brought her exactly where she needed to be. And that, Clara thought as Caleb finally released her and they walked hand in hand toward their children's voices, was more than enough. It was everything.